and extends the invitation, and whenever he teaches a class. So I know how being a proud parent is, and it's just great that these young people can do that. And I say young, my son is not so young anymore, but he's younger than I am. So, and we're glad for Randy to be here, and even though he's got somebody inside his body this morning. Yeah. But we're thankful there's a lot of sickness going on right now. We're grateful indeed for everybody being here this morning, and it's indeed a great joy. A lesson that I want to talk about this morning is entitled Clothed and in His Right Mind, and we take that from Luke, the 8th chapter, and in verse 35. The thing that prompted this lesson was I was watching the inauguration, and most of you that, if you did watch it, one of the things probably you observed, first of all, was the different apparel that people were wearing. And one of the people that the news media seemed to, and other people seemed to hone in on was Jeff Bezos' fiancée, Lauren Sanchez, I think her name is. And she created quite a stir when wearing what some thought was to be inappropriate attire at the inauguration of President Trump. One thing I saw online was that Mark Zuckerberg was sitting next to her, and he was caught on camera looking at her cleavage. And it was interesting listening to a radio program that I do quite frequently, how that many of those people that called in and talked about that didn't see anything wrong with it, thought that it was perfectly appropriate what she wore. Some of them obviously did not, but if you haven't seen that and know what I'm talking about, it might be good for you to get online and look at that and see so that you'll know what we're talking about. I considered it not to be a proper attire for that or really any other type of gathering. And so as I was thinking about this, it raised the question, what is appropriate attire and what is not appropriate attire? And we haven't studied this subject for quite some time, I don't think, and so I want to look at some of the things that the Bible talks about. Whenever as we begin to study this subject, I want us to realize that the Bible speaks in terms of modesty and moral principles rather than style. It doesn't tell us what kind of style we're to adhere to, or it really doesn't even tell us how low your skirts are supposed to be or how tight your pants are supposed to be. But it does speak in terms of moral principles and modesty. We learn quite a bit from different passages that it is modesty that we're talking about here. Now I want to look at Luke, the 8th chapter, beginning of verse 26. Then they sailed to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite Galilee. And when he had stepped out of on the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. Now, if we think about this event that we're going to talk about for just a few moments, and actually where we get our title for our lesson from, Jesus had been on the opposite side of the Sea of Galilee. We don't know exactly where. We're told that he had been going through the cities and the villages and had been healing, and that he had been doing such things as this, and preaching and healing and all of those kinds of things that he did. And then he decided to get in the boat, and into a boat and to go across the Sea of Galilee to the Gadara, or the area of the Gadarenes, which is down to the bottom right there that you see that red marker there. Well, while they were on the boat, Jesus went down into the lower part of the boat and went to sleep. And during the course of that time, a strong wind came up, And so much so that the disciples thought that the ship was going to shipwreck and they would be drowned. They woke Jesus up, and he referred to them. He asked the question, why do you not have faith that you ought to? And then he told the wind to be still, and it did. The wind was stopped, and the ocean the waves were settled, and they were saved. And the people on board there, the disciples were, and I think it shows something of where they were in regard to their spiritual enlightenment as they had been with the Lord. And they asked, who is this man? They say, who is this person that he can tell the wind to be still, or he can control nature? And so after this, of course, the ship went on and came into this area of the Gadarenes, and he steps on ashore, and he comes into a man who is demon possessed. And this demonic person was naked, and he was naked when he was not in his right mind. Look at Luke 8 and verse 27. And when he stepped out on the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had demons for a long time. And he wore no clothes, nor did he live in a house, but in tombs. So I want you to notice that he was naked, or he wore no clothes because he was demon possessed. But look, when we go on down and we see that Jesus had the demons removed, he asked the question, what is your name? He said, my name is Legion, because there were many demons within him. And you remember whenever he cast the demons out and put them into the swine, and the swine, of course, went down into the lake and were drowned. And verse 35, I want you to notice that he says, when he was naked, he was not in his right mind, but when he was clothed, he was in his right mind. Verse 35 of chapter 8, then they went out to see what had happened, and came to Jesus, and found the man from whom the demons had departed sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. Now, I think this is interesting, that here we have a person who has come in contact with Jesus, and he had a profound change in his life. I think that's a good lesson for us today. We need to preach that as loud and as far as we can possibly do it, that coming to Jesus should make a profound difference in our life. And it did to this man. He was clothed and in his right mind. So I want to talk about this idea of clothing, what the Bible has to say about it. And our clothing reflects what is on our mind and what our motives are. And our clothes communicate something about who we are. In Deuteronomy 25 and verse 5, we find there that Moses said, a woman shall not wear anything that pertains to a man, nor shall a man put on a woman's garments, for all who do so are an abomination to the Lord your God. Now, I don't claim to know all that is involved in this passage, but it seems to me that it is very clearly saying that there is to be a distinction between what a man and a woman wear. And we see that in our society today, that many people today, men are trying to be women and women are trying to be men. And clothing makes a difference and a distinction. And he very clearly shows that. Now, I know as we talk about this, some people say, well, you're just making a big deal about clothes, that it's really not that important what a person wears. But I looked up, I just decided I'm going to look up on the internet, and I think I typed in, what do people say about clothes? And here's what I got back. What you wear, and this would not be Christians that would be talking here, this would probably be the people of the world. What you wear is how you present yourself to the world. Fashion is instant language. Clothes have developed from a practical asset to a social marker. Our clothing choices can have a profound impact on our self-perception. The clothes we wear tell stories of our culture and our heritage. And under the heading, How Do Clothes Reflect Identity? People use clothing to present the image they want to portray. People use clothing to present the image they want to portray. I remember hearing Dolly Parton say one time, and she probably said it several times, but I heard her at least one time. She says, "It costs me a whole lot of money to look as cheap as I do." And she is trying to, that was the impression that she was trying to portray to the public. And she did a good job of it. And as she said, it cost her a lot of money to do that. Also, people can adapt their style to different situations and environments. People can express their uniqueness, values, and interests through their clothing. So all of these things are those things that clothing, sending that message. So I want to look for just a few minutes about what the Bible has to say. And as I mentioned a moment ago, if you're looking for a definite how far down your skirts are supposed to go, or how tight your pants are supposed to be, or how loose they're supposed to be, you just won't find that there. But you will find the principle of modesty and such things as this. And I think all of us know whenever we see someone, whether they are dressed modestly or whether they are dressed immodestly or inappropriate. But let's look a couple of things, a couple of verses now. In Proverbs, the 11th chapter, the wise man says, "As a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so is a lovely woman who lacks discretion." Now, obviously, there is not a place in a swine's snout for a ring of gold. And the same thing is true. There should be no place for a lovely woman who lacks discretion. And obviously, that could be in regard to their apparel as well as other behaviors that she might have. In 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verses 8 through 10, Paul, writing to the preacher Timothy, says, "I desire, therefore, that the men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. In like manner also that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women professing godliness with good works." Now, we might look at those verses, or those couple of those words there. Adorn. This word in the Greek means to put in order. So whenever you get dressed, you adorn yourself in order, a proper, orderly or proper manner. A modest, well-ordered, decent is what the Greek word there means. Apparel, a garment let down, covering. So what he is referring to here when he speaks of apparel, modest apparel, he's speaking of that which covers certain parts of one's body. The King James Version uses the word shamefacedness, or shamefastness. The New King James Version uses the word propriety. It is a sense of shame. Nakedness should cause a person to have a sense of shame rather than being exposed when a person exposes their body, rather than a thing of pride. Propriety, the King James Version uses that word. The New King James uses the word moderation, and it means soundness of mind and self-control. We talked about this word propriety in a lesson a few months ago. And so whenever we think about sobriety, rather than just talking about being drunk or under the influence, which it sometimes does mean, it also means soundness of mind, being under self-control. And these are the words that the Apostle Paul uses as he writes to Timothy concerning how women are to dress. And I think some of these things, obviously, would apply to men as well. Godliness, God-fearing respect, a reverence toward an individual. Whenever you see the way that some people do dress, it is obvious that they are not God-fearing individuals. And then he says, he speaks of good works. So my behavior should be about what I'm doing for the Lord, not about my apparel. And so whenever we look at how we dress, these are things that we should keep in mind and consider. Also, we find the Apostle Peter writes concerning this, and he says basically the same thing, but I think he makes it even more clear as to how women are to dress and what he's actually talking about. In 1 Peter chapter 3, and beginning at verse 3, do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner in former times the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. Now the Apostle Peter, as well as the Apostle Paul, is not making a blanket statement that you should not wear jewelry, and that you should not fix your hair, and that you should not wear nice clothing. But rather he is making a contrast there. Rather than for it, that which you do, that which you wear, being a show and not having that inward person to come out in your personality would be improper. And both of these verses that we've just looked at, I think, are teaching that very thing. Not that you should go around with no makeup on, or not that you should not keep your hair well done, and such things as this, but rather when women address themselves, and again I say I think men, that would apply as well, that they are to do so recognizing that they are to present an image to the world of a kind of person that he speaks of here, that they're the hidden person of their heart, that incorruptible beauty that is to be found. Notice that he refers to the hidden man of the heart, or the hidden person of the heart. That person that is incorruptible, that beauty that is incorruptible. Meek, as the King James Version says, the New King James refers to gentle. It means strength under control, or gentleness. And quiet, tranquil, peaceful, calm. So that's the way that women are to convey themselves to the world, to other people. Now, one thing about these two verses, I know some religious groups, so the United Pentecostal Church and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they take these literally. And they do not believe that women can wear jewelry and that women can fix their hair to look nice, other than in a certain way that they have designated is proper. But I don't believe that's what the Bible is teaching. The Bible is not saying that women cannot look attractive, cannot look nice, but the way women dress is to distinguish between a person who is interested in looking, showing her body and demonstrating that she has a body to be admired, rather than the hidden person of the heart. So let's keep that in mind as we go through the rest of our lesson. Now, I want to talk about three different attitudes that we have, or statements that a person can try to make in regard to what they wear. The first attitude is look at my wealth. I know that there are people in the world today, and we're talking specifically about dress, that the way they dress, they want to show their wealth. They want to, that's the thing that they want to come out. Look at me. I have got it made. I make a lot of money, and I'm willing to show it. If you've got it, flaunt it, as some people have said. And so that's an attitude that a person can have. But I believe that the Bible says that we're to look at the heart. I want you to look at my heart. The way I dress, I want to be a reflection of the inner person. And again, I think that should be both women and men. Men need to be careful what they wear as well. I remember back in the 70s, I guess it was, when, I don't know whether you all remember this or not, but leisure suits were real popular. And those suits, a lot of Christians wore them. And some Christians, those leisure suits, you wore a shirt that was open, 2 or 3 buttons at the top, where your chest hairs were exposed or whatever. And it was a certain attitude that you portrayed. You didn't wear a tie. You had a large collared shirt that usually was on the outside of the jacket. And a lot of people were offended at that. A lot of preachers. I sat under the feet of a lot of the preachers that very much were opposed to these because they seemed to be too sensual for men, and very possibly that could have been. But they did not display the attitude of look at me and look at my heart. Look at the kind of person I am. So we can have that type of attitude. There are a couple of examples that we might give by contrast that the Bible teaches about. In Mark, the 1st chapter, we learn of John the Baptist. Now, John was clothed with camel's hair and with a leather belt around his waist, and he ate locusts and wild honey. Now, in contrast to that, there's that rich man that we learn about in Luke, the 16th chapter. There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. So here is a contrast between 2 different people, 2 different styles of wearing certain items of clothing. And they both convey a different message, a different attitude. And that's the thing that I think we need to be aware of, that one conveys an attitude of humility and the other of arrogance. And then in James talks about 2 different people coming into the assembly. He said, for if there should come into your assembly a man with gold rings in fine apparel, and there should also come in a poor man in filthy clothes, and you pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes, and say to him, you sit here in a good place, and say to the poor man, you stand there or sit here at my footstool. And what he's saying here is that whenever we have this attitude, whenever we look at the outward appearance of people, that we're not doing as God would have them to do. But again, the distinction, by what you wear, there is a distinction that you show and that people see. And that's the point of this lesson. Whenever we do certain things, we wear certain clothing, we convey a certain message. But another attitude that a person can have, and a statement that they're trying to make, is that concerning their body. Am I trying to make a statement about my body? In Proverbs 7 and verse 10, you can do that. And women certainly need to be aware of that. In verse 10 of Proverbs 7, the wise man said, and there a woman met him with the attire of a harlot and a crafty heart. Now, I don't know what she looked like, but he says, the attire of a harlot. When there are many women today that would be offended if you told them that they looked like a harlot. But the way they dress, that's exactly what they look like. And I know a lot of women don't appreciate that and say, well, it's just your dirty mind, men who would draw that conclusion. But I'm telling you, and I think you really know that that when you dress a certain way, you can convey a certain message. And it could be the attire of a harlot. And so women definitely need to be very much aware about of that. In Genesis chapter 38, in verse 14, this is talking about Tamar and the attitude that she had and what she actually did to entice Judah on this occasion. Now, Tamar was the daughter-in-law of Judah. In Genesis 38 and verse 14, so she took off her widow's garments, she was a widow at this time, covered herself with a veil, and wrapped herself and sat in an open place which was on the way to Timnah. Now this is the daughter-in-law of Judah. And in verse 15 says, when Judah saw her, he thought she was a harlot because she had covered her face. Now I don't know what she looked like, but whatever it was, this says that because she covered her face, there may have been some other things as well, but he thought she was a harlot. She presented herself as being a harlot. And we're not going to talk about all of that which transpired there, but basically he thought she was a harlot. He asked her how much it would cost for him to go into her, and she told him, and he did so. And ultimately, she had twins, I believe it was, and he was disgraced because of what he had done. And so here was a condition where he saw her, did not know who she was, and thought that she was a harlot. So women can dress in just such a way as that. One thing I think that is good for people to realize, am I dressing to show off my body, or am I dressing to show my character? Certainly it should be our character. In Proverbs 31, the wise man there says, charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Now, I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know, but the fact is that beautiful women, over time, lose that beauty, just as men lose their handsomeness. We all change when we get older, and not everybody changes as rapidly as other people do, but we need to keep this verse in mind. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing. What we are today is not what we're going to be 20 or 30 years from now. Clothing is for the purpose of covering the body. Genesis chapter 3, in verse 21, also for Adam and his wife, the Lord made tunics of skin and clothed them. We know that they were naked before they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Before they understood what sin was, they attempted to clothe themselves with leaves, but God made them more permanent clothing, tunics of skin, and clothed them. So it has always been God's purpose since the time that people sinned, Adam and Eve sinned, for people to be clothed whenever they are out in public. In Nahum, the 3rd chapter, we have again this idea of the contrast between nakedness and shame. And he says there, I will lift your skins over your face, talking about these people that were against God. He said, I will lift your skirts over your face. I will show the nations your nakedness and the kingdoms your shame. Nakedness is to be a shameful thing. And it is a shame whenever we display our body in an improper way. In Exodus 20 and verse 26, nor shall you go by the steps to my altar, that your nakedness may not be exposed on it. Now here's instruction by Moses, instruction that God gave Moses to the priests, that the altar that he's talking about was not to have stairs going up to it because it would expose their nakedness, or could expose their nakedness to the people around them. And then in Exodus 28, he gives instruction again. God gives Moses instruction for the priest. You shall make for them linen trousers to cover your nakedness. They shall reach from the waist to the thighs. I looked up what a thigh consisted of, and it's the muscle that is from the hip socket down to the knee. That is what is considered the thigh. So a person that I believe that what he's saying here is that is the length that is to be of these trousers that the priests were to wear. And so there's some direction that they were given, at least, as to how long that was to be, those garments were to be. And then the last thing I want to look at is the statement that I make. Is it a statement about my respect for someone important? A good example of that, I think, is in Genesis chapter 41. Joseph there, you remember, he was thrown into prison, and it was found out that he was able to interpret certain things. And verse 14 says, Then Pharaoh sent and called to Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon, but they didn't bring him immediately to Pharaoh. Look what it says. And he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. So he got dressed up. He got cleaned up. Okay, and they could have just brought him right into him with whatever he had on, nasty, dirty, filthy. And so this shows that these people had respect for Pharaoh and wanted him to be properly presented to Pharaoh. And I think that is the condition that we need to, a situation that we need to consider whenever we're doing certain things. You know, sometimes you put on certain garments that are more appropriate for one type of outing or one type of event than for others. If you go to a funeral, you probably don't dress like you're going out and working in the field. And I believe the same thing is true at church. We wouldn't wear the same things that we're going, like we're going to work in a field, or we're going to do some carpentry work or such as that. And again, I remember years ago, these old-timey preachers, whenever they always talked about it was not good for men of the congregation not to wear a tie when they came to church. I'm not of that persuasion, but they were adamant about it. They thought that it was wrong if you did not wear a tie. And but certainly there is a certain type of decorum that you wear under certain circumstances that you would not necessarily do under other circumstances. So there's a good example that we have of going before someone, an important person, and you cleaned up and did the best that you could in regard to what you wore. And then 2 Samuel, the 12th chapter, we have another example of that. Now this is the case where David was mourning over the imminent death of his newborn son. And he, for 7 days, he did not eat. He stayed in his room. And according to verse 20 says, he arose from the ground and that he washed and anointed himself and changed his clothes. So that seems that he had worn the same clothing, and that he did not wash, and that he did not take care of himself or change his clothes for that 7-day period. But when the child died, and he learned that he died, says that this is what he did. And he went into the house of the Lord and worshiped. He would not go into the presence of the Lord until he had done these things. He had cleaned himself up and changed his clothing. So these are good illustrations, I believe, whenever we have to be at a certain place that we need to wear the certain clothing that is appropriate for that event. And then we find that this idea of choosing clothing with a right mind. When we buy clothes, don't just consider the latest styles, but what is the statement I am making? In other words, when I buy my clothes, what kind of statement will I make when I wear these clothing? Dress from the inside, that is the heart, out to the body. Start early with your children to teach them about the right thinking and motives. Remember, clothing is a basic necessity, not a style, requirements laid down by society. Let's dress like we have met Jesus and we are in our right mind. Remember what I said a while ago. When we come in contact with Jesus, it needs to make a definite difference in our lives. And the Apostle Paul said in Romans 13 and verse 14, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ, or clothe yourself with the Lord Jesus Christ, as some versions say, and make no provision for the flesh to fulfill its lusts. In Galatians 3 and verse 27, the Apostle Paul there tells us how we are to clothe ourselves with him and when we become clothed with Christ. In verse 26, he said, so in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ. This passage says that we don't get into Christ without being baptized into Christ. That is water baptism that he's talking about. And when we are baptized, we have clothed ourselves with Christ. So we think about clothing, it definitely has a spiritual connotation. And it may be that I'm talking to one this morning who needs to obey the gospel through faith, repentance, confession, and baptism, water baptism, for the remission of sins. If you've not done that, you need to think seriously about that. Those in our audience, out in the internet audience, you need to think about that as well. And we would be glad to help you in whatever way we can as you come to realize that you have a need of doing that very thing. So if you're here today and you need to obey the gospel, or you need to make yourself right if you're a child of God, having something that is amiss in your life, whatever it might be, won't you come as we stand and as we sing.
You've been to Jesus.